name's John Borowski, and this is the April 10th public hearing and possible action for the Eugene Planning Commission. I'm going to start off by reading a little opening statement, and then we'll get into our business of today. So, good evening. Thank you all for coming. We called the meeting to order. That's already been done. Tonight we'll be holding a public hearing of the Eugene Planning Commission on a land use code amendment related to parking requirements at Edison Elementary School. I am the chair of the Planning Commission, John Borowski, and if each of the commissioners would introduce themselves.
I'm John Jaworski.
Bill Randall. Stephen Baker.
Kristen Taylor.
And we also have staff. Would you introduce yourselves?
Alyssa Hanson with the Planning Division.
Lauren Summers, Assistant City Attorney.
Okay. I'd like to take a moment to explain who the Planning Commission is and our role. We're unpaid volunteers appointed by the Eugene City Council to 4-year terms on the commission. This commission often makes recommendations to the City Council on legislative matters such as plan amendments and adoption of new land use regulations. We are also hear appeals of decisions made by a city hearings official. Tonight's item is a site-specific land use code amendment. The Planning Commission's role in this item is to make a recommendation to the City Council on whether or not to approve with modifications or deny the proposed land use code amendment. Time permitting, and depending on whether the record is held open for additional testimony, the Planning Commission may choose to deliberate and take action on this item tonight. Some of the terms we have used here are legalistic, so I'll try to explain them in plain English. Since this is a hearing on a site-specific land use code amendment, there are unique procedures which we are legally required to follow. The decision-making process on this type of land use code amendment is considered quasi-judicial, so we will use quasi-judicial format for this public hearing. This means we have a certain order of speakers that we need to follow, and there are certain rules or criteria that our decision must be based upon. The purpose of the hearing is to receive relevant testimony on the request before us. I want to remind everyone that your testimony should be directed towards the approval criteria that the speaker believes to apply. This is because Eugene Code requires that the Planning Commission's recommendations be based on the approval criteria to the request. For reference, those approval criteria are listed in the staff report. Those wishing to speak during tonight's public hearing should have already submitted a completed request to speak form. If you wish to speak and you have not already done so, please grab one from the back and fill it out. Once the public hearing is open, speakers will be called in the following order. 1, those in support of the proposed code amendment. 2, those with a neutral position, and 3, those opposed to the proposed code amendment. I know commissioners have asked for more clarity on when it is appropriate to ask questions, and staff has suggested that we should ask those questions at the end of each person's testimony when they arise. At the end of all testimony, staff will have a chance to respond, and commissioners will also have the opportunity to ask additional questions of staff. I'm also supposed to remind everyone that the failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to allow the Planning Commission and parties to respond will preclude future appeals on that issue. In other words, now is your opportunity to raise issues as clearly as you can so the city and other parties can address them. Before we begin, Eugene Code also requires that planning commissioners disclose any conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, or biases or abstentions. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, the parties are entitled to an impartial or neutral decision maker. To ensure this fair consideration of the rules, the rules attempt to limit ex parte contacts or communications between a party and the decision maker outside the public hearing process. Each planning commissioner must disclose and describe the substance of any communications they have had about the case outside of the public process. The planning commissioners must also disclose any potential conflicts of interest, that is, whether the decision they're about to make could or would result in a personal financial gain to themselves, their business, or a member of their household. Finally, a planning commissioner cannot participate if he or she is biased. That is, for whatever reason, he or she is incapable of rendering an objective decision in the case. Do any commissioners at this time have anything to disclose? I would just disclose that we received some testimony this evening. It was a letter from the Fairmont Neighborhood Association Board, and I'm a member of that board. My name is listed on the document, but when this was being discussed, I excused myself from the room and did not participate in the vote on that thing. So my name probably shouldn't have been on there, but that's the extent of my disclosures.
Commissioner Borowski, can I interrupt you for a moment?
Yes.
So just to be clear, you were present at the meeting where it was discussed, but during the actual discussion of this matter, you excused yourself and left the room and did not participate in the discussion.
Yeah, when the agenda item came up for Edison School, I left the room. When that item had been voted on and that had been discussed and taken care of, I returned to it, and I hadn't seen the letter until just this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Does anybody in the audience or a member of the commission wish to challenge the impartiality of any planning commissioner? Seeing none.
Can I
Yes.
add something just because I saw your eyes? I actually live 2 blocks from Edison, so I just want to, I'll own that. I don't have a conflict of interest, but I do frequent Edison to walk my dogs. So I have seen the plaques. I'm aware of the site. So
There we go. Okay. With that, we will begin with a staff presentation. Then we'll open up the public hearing, go to those who are in support, neutral, and opposed. So I'm going to turn it over to staff at this point.
Thank you. As you said, tonight's public hearing is on a proposed land use code amendment that would waive parking for a new or remodeled school on the Edison Elementary site. If this proposed amendment is ultimately adopted by City Council, no on-site parking, so either a parking lot or a structure, would be required in conjunction with the construction of a new or remodeled school on the Edison school site, which is at 1328 East 22nd Avenue in South Eugene. What's proposed that in lieu of providing on-site parking, Edison or the 4J school district would be required to submit a transportation demand management plan that contains strategies for reducing basically the use of the car and parking, and would encourage biking, walking, carpooling, and busing to the site. Just for a little bit of background, Edison is one of the 4J school district's smallest and oldest schools. It's also been identified for possible either reconstruction or remodel or replacement as part of an upcoming proposed upcoming bond measure. It has no parking on site, so there's no parking lot, no structured parking associated with Edison, and it's been that way since it was constructed in the 1920s. There are 35 parking spaces on the block that Edison sits on, so it sits on its own block, and there are 35 spaces that actually there's an agreement between the city and the school to allow school staff to park there through a permit program. So that's how they're handling staff parking at this point for staff who want a permit. It also happens to be in a neighborhood where there is a fair amount of walking and biking, but also there is driving as well. 4J is looking, as I mentioned, at rebuilding or remodeling it, which would likely increase the capacity of the school. Based on our current land use regulations, it would be required to have 42 parking spaces. And just kind of as a ballpark, that's at least a half acre in parking, if not more, which would probably be somewhere between, it could be up to a quarter of that site, and would have the potential to take away, any of the outdoor amenities, lawn parking area, or lawn play area, which would probably most likely be impacted. They've also looked at structured parking, and that would add $3 to $5 million onto the cost of replacing or remodeling the school. The city has heard pretty broad support from neighborhood residents to waive the parking requirements and basically grandfather the existing on-street parking. There, you've noticed the testimony in your packet that has been submitted by neighborhood residents has all been in support. In response to this support, that is why City Council actually initiated this land use code amendment. The other thing I just want to mention, so we did send out public notice. There are signs on the site, and you've received the testimony in the packet today. I emailed you 2 letters. One was from Mimi Cato, and so you have that in front of you as well, and another letter from Pamela Miller also in front of you. And then just this afternoon we received an email from Noah Parsons on behalf of the Fairmont Neighbors Association Board, which is also in front of you. So you have all of the testimony that's been submitted to date on this. I will also mention the applicable criteria that we will use in your decision making is from section 9.8065 of the Eugene Code. That's also included in the staff report. Let's see, just in terms of next steps, depending on how tonight's hearing goes, we have provided that there's a possibility that you will be taking action tonight. So there are proposed motions in front of you. As you know, your role is either to recommend approval with modifications, or recommend denial. And so those are the 3 options provided in the motion. If you're proposing to recommend any modifications, those would need to be kind of spelled out. The City Council public hearing is set for May 29th, and council action is set for June 11th. And that is all I have.
Okay. With that, I will open the public hearing, and we will ask for public testimony. And here are our stack. We have 2 people speaking in favor of, and 1 person speaking that didn't check one. So we'll put those at the 3rd one, which is Eileen Nittler, as neutral. I'll put you as neutral. Okay, well, we'll put you in favor then. So with only 3 of these, you guys can talk for, I'd say, up to 5 minutes would be my time limit on this. I don't know if you'll need that much, but if you do go over 5 minutes, I might start waving at you. So with that, Carrie Parsons is our first person. Come on up.
Good evening. My name is Kari Parsons, and I am a neighbor of Edison Elementary, kids that went there as well. And I'm the chair of SENSE, which is a grassroots organization of Edison neighbors, SUNA neighbors, Fairmount, anyone in the general vicinity or who's interested in Edison Elementary and wanting to keep an elementary school at that site. And I wanted just to share with you, so I provided some testimony in writing, and then the SUNA board is also, which I also said on the SUNA board, has submitted their testimony in favor of the waiver as well. I wanted to give you a little bit of input on the public outreach that we did to get a sense of what neighbors think about, neighbors, staff, and Edison parents think about the parking situation and the proposal for underground parking garage, which was what 4J put forward. And so we canvassed nearly 100 homes surrounding Edison and went door to door asking opinions on the proposed parking garage and their experience with on-street parking. We also fielded an online survey. We got 64 neighbor responses. 139 Edison parents responded to a survey to them, and then teachers and staff, we got 21 responses. The amazing thing, and maybe it's not very amazing because it's a little bit of a no-brainer, but there was near unanimous support for grandfathering in the on-street parking, and I'll give you a little bit of background on what the rationales were for that. Edison has worked essentially for all these years without one, so it was one of those, if it's not broke, why fix it moments. And then what we also heard was that a garage would be much more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing on-street parking. It creates a cross-curb situation, cross-sidewalk situation, which we don't have right now. There's no auto and car interface there across the sidewalks. It would create traffic bottlenecks of cars going in and out of this parking garage versus now the parking is diffuse and around the neighborhood and has a lot of different entry and exit points. And it was considered a security risk as well, sort of an attractive nuisance for those times when the school is not using the parking garage. We also, as Alyssa mentioned, we have a small lot. The siting of Edison encourages walking and biking. A lot of families do that already. And there's no big streets to cross. And so it's really sited in a way that is really good for walking and biking and definitely hits our sustainability goals for Eugene. And then what we also heard was that the nearby neighbors are not negatively impacted by the street parking. In fact, some find it very sweet to see the families, coming and parking and walking to school for those families. Edison serves folks up in the hills and over on Laurel Hill Valley, so a lot of folks, if they're not taking the bus, they do drive in, drop their kids off on their way to work or something like that. So there are families that do need to drive, but they can park on the street, and the parents were happy with that situation by and large. And then overall, there was just this sense that it was a waste of very tight education dollars that could be put into better use. So in sum, the sense was that the current parking codes for this particular situation are not really appropriate, and that's why we're asking for your support for the waiver in this particular situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie Delph is next.
Thank you. My name is Carrie Delph. I'm with Eugene School District 4J, and we'd like to thank the Planning Commission for considering this amendment to the code. The amendment is consistent with the criteria that are set for the Planning Commission to consider, and that's been delineated by staff in the staff report. So I'd like to just say a few things about the reasons the district is making a request for this change. First, I would like to say that our superintendent, Dr. Gustavo Balderas, would have liked to have testified tonight. He had a schedule conflict and apologizes that he couldn't be here in person, but the school board chair here is here to testify. So the district has submitted some testimony in writing to the mayor and city council, which has been shared with the planning commission. But some key elements of that are that this building has stood serving its school community for many decades. It does not have on-site parking now, and the school community has worked creatively to solve the lack of parking. Having no on-site parking, it does have 300 plus students, nearly 400 students attending every day, and has worked with the city, worked with carpooling, worked with walking and biking groups to ensure that there's minimal impact, minimal negative impact of cars coming and having a lack of parking on site. So our view is that the parking added on site would not be necessary, and the district is amenable to having a transportation demand management plan in place to help ensure that that continues to be a workable situation and solution going forward. In addition, putting parking on the site is not reasonably feasible. It's a 2-acre site. It is by far the smallest elementary school site in the district or in the area, much smaller than most school sites are. It has barely enough room for a school, for the necessary play areas. These are not nice to haves. These are not add-ons. Elementary schools have to have space for students to be outside. They need to have playgrounds. They need to have fields. So there's not a lot of, there's no unused empty space. And if a quarter of that lot were taking up with parking, it would have a significant impact on the operation of the school, which is also a part of its community. So when the school isn't in session, those outdoor areas are used by community and neighbors as well. The only potentially feasible option would be that the district considers would be to put multi-level parking on the site which, as has been noted, would be very expensive with very limited education dollars. It would be an attractive nuisance, and we feel it's not a necessary or reasonable solution. If there is an opportunity to have an amendment to the city code to continue to grandfather in the on-site parking or on-street parking instead of on-site parking that has been used at Edison, that seems to us the most reasonable solution and a win-win for both the district and the city, as well as the neighborhood community around that. And finally, the school overwhelmingly, the families in the school, the staff in the school, and the neighbors that have been surveyed by the community group that you just heard from have been supportive of this. So we are asking the Planning Commission to support this amendment.
Great. Any questions? I know I've got just one quick one. Staff alluded to the fact that a new building might have increased capacity. Do you is that something that you are, and do you know how much larger the school might get?
Yes, so the final plans haven't been made. The school board is talking now about a potential bond measure on the November ballot, and the details are still under discussion. The building, it currently has a stated capacity of 350 or so. It currently has about 380 students attending the school. Many of those are multiple students from the same family, so their transportation is the same, and they walk and bike, etc. But we do have cars dropping off students. The standard for schools in elementary schools in Eugene School District 4J now is to build to between 450 and 600 capacity. We are not looking at putting a 600 capacity school on that site. It's a small site in the heart of a neighborhood, so we would be looking most likely at about 450 student capacity. So it would be an increase in capacity, but not a unfeasible one.
Okay, thank you. That helps me out. Any other questions? Okay. Last is Eileen Nittler. There you go.
Oh.
I would never.
Well, it does.
Okay.
Hi, I'm here to speak on behalf of the 4J School Board, and I won't duplicate anything Carrie Delph just said. There's another piece that I wanted to address if we're doing the underground parking or multi-layer parking. A few months back, we had a facilities audit done for the entire district, and it showed we have roughly $1 billion in needs. And the reason we're coming here when $4 million doesn't seem like a lot of money out of that, we're looking to save dollars wherever we can. We can't ask the taxpayers we can't reasonably expect them to approve a $1 billion bond or anything close to that. So what we're doing is we're hoping we can save anywhere we can so that money can be put towards other projects because our needs are great. And that is, I think, all I'm going to say in addition to what the others have said.
Okay. Thank you. Any other people turn in any other requests to speak for them? Okay. At this point, I will close the public hearing. And then ask if any of the commissioners want to keep the record open or if you'd like to close the record at this point. I would entertain a motion to close the record.
Second.
I move to close the record.
And a second from Commissioner Baker. Any discussion on that? And hearing nobody from the audience who wants to keep it open. All those in favor of closing the record at this point? Record is closed. At this point, the Planning Commission can begin to deliberate on this matter. Again, for the people who are here, this isn't the final decision on this. This is a recommendation to the City Council from the Planning Commission. We look at the code and see if it meets the applicable parts of the code and make a recommendation. The final decision on this will be made by the City Council on the 29th of May. Is that what you said, Alyssa? Okay, so.
Well, actually, that's the hearing date. I'm sorry. The action is June 11th.
Okay, so will be another opportunity to testify, and that would be at the City Council on the 29th, and then they will take possible action on the June 11th. Discussion. Commissioner Taylor.
I just have a question for staff. In terms of the language on page 5 for the addition subsection E, 3E, I'm just curious, and I don't have the code in front of me in terms of the outline of what TDM requirements are. I'm just curious why so much detail is actually part of E. Like if there's some redundancy, have we created enough specificity that they're, anyways, I just wanted a little bit more.
No, I think that's a good question. So the TDM, where it's outlined in our code, is actually under the adjustment review section.
Okay.
And so by default, because this isn't an adjustment review, this is a kind of a separate exemption or waiver, we had to add some specificity so that there would be some parameters for it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner Randall.
I think this is, frankly, a no-brainer. And I think the beauty of it is it's operated well for 92 years, and there haven't been any problems. We've had no public testimony opposed to it. It sounds like they're already pretty much doing a TDM, I mean, or have been, because it sounds like that part has continued to work. So I would express my support of this.
I put myself in the queue. Well, go ahead, Commissioner Baker.
I was just going to say, follow on and say I've been on the Planning Commission quite a while, and I have never been to a hearing where there wasn't testimony both for and against. So this is truly unusual for us.
All right. I put myself in the queue. A couple of things were very reassuring for me tonight. One was the fact that the capacity wasn't going to be increased largely. I also live in this neighborhood or adjacent to this neighborhood, and parking is a concern in the South University Fairmont neighborhood because of the university more so than from the Edison School. So just to say that there is no parking issues in South University neighborhood is not necessarily true. But in this case, I think it is working. And the other thing that I was very encouraged by, and I'm going to read the section from section E that Commissioner Taylor referenced. It says the TDM plan shall contain strategies for reducing motor vehicle use and parking demands generated by the development and shall establish benchmarks by which the program's effectiveness will be measured annually. The TDM plan shall include, but need not to be limited to, strategies to address the use of street parking, safe routes to school planning, and the promotion of bicycle, walking, busing, and carpools to the schools. So that's written into this change. So I think that was very well put in there. I think that gives the neighborhood consistency that this isn't going to get out of control. So with that, I also am in favor of it. Commissioner Jaworski is the last one to speak on the issue.
Well, I didn't have my hand up, but I'm supportive, and you've pretty much every commissioner's reiterated what I would have said. I just think this is, as Commissioner Baker indicated, one of the most unusual ones we've seen, and it should be fairly quick.
Am I okay to move forward and just present that I move to recommend that City Council approve the proposed land use code amendment as provided in Attachment A to the April 10th, 2018 Planning Commission agenda item summary?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Oh, excuse me.
Sorry, one moment, Commissioner Browski.
We're going too fast for you?
That was the first one.
Oh, no, we're good. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, seeing no more discussion, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay.
Can you tell me who seconded that?
I think we both did at the same time, so whoever
Commissioner Jaworski
called Jaworski.
Okay.
seconded that. Okay, with that, I'm going to close the meeting.